Welcome back to the Allied Health Warrior podcast. Really excited today to be delving into the topic that on every allied health professional's list on the NDIS pricing changes and the recommendations that were made. Today I have one of my leading staff members from my company, Mr. Phil James, Head of Infrastructure and Support, Basic and Operations role within Optimum Health Solutions. So we want to welcome you to today's podcast.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here. Great to join the pod.
Excellent. Well, lots happened very quickly in the NDIS pricing. And give me your summary of a take of that, being, heading up a large organization or being part of the implementation of a large organization. What's your take so far?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of shock and awe initially that's come in with the changes, limited notice on what's happening, and some real surprises in the changes. There was some clues a few days out, and most of those ideas came through from the independent committee. They came through in the final pricing. The cuts to travel, I think it's something we'll definitely talk about, a real change for the system. Some of it's positive, some maybe not so much. And some of the devaluation of the services and the therapy services that are provided to our participants and to the industry are also a bit of a surprise.
Awesome. So let's work our way, down the list and let's just create a real discussion today around some of these points. So Phil, where should we start today?
Yeah, I think a great kickoff point would be the independent recommendations and how that's come about.
Yeah, that was interesting. It was kind of interesting how quickly the independent recommendations came out. Yet within a week, they'd published them as gospel, and the changes were made. I think pretty much everything that was said in that was implemented. But one of the things that really disturbed me about the independent was really the wording and the tone that was used.
The language around participants.
Yeah, it was the thing that probably sums up the most and the simplest is a comment was made is that we're here to maximize the participants' money or the money the participants use or how they maximize the participants' money.
Yep.
And I just remember thinking as I was reading this, when did it become the participants' money? That's the thing. The insurance scheme is designed to provide outcomes and support for the people who need it, but it's the taxpayers' money. And to have an independent commission make recommendations and use language like that was the start of just something that just didn't sit right with me. We can go through what the recommendations were, but the fact is the failure to realize that this insurance scheme is something that the whole country is investing into and that it is the taxpayers' money. Now, we want to get direct and indirect return on that investment, and we want to see the people who need it the most get the services they need. But to use that language from an independent commission just blew my mind.
It really stepped away from, I guess, the foundations of the scheme, which is to support participants and to enable them to live their best life and to improve their health outcomes.
Yeah, because what it did was just said, well, we're giving you money. And our goal is to maximize the money we give you. And that blew my mind. And I think that's an important start. Now, the language changed once we moved into the pricing recommendations and so forth. It became, they used their more traditional language. But the fact that platform existed, that it's like, well, we want to just save participants money.
Yeah.
Blew my mind. And I think that was a wrong place for us to start, because we can get in, because when it moved fast forward 1 week, every single one of the recommendations was implemented. There was one that wasn't.
I think they were looking at skipping it down to 10-minute intervals to try and get more fragmented servicing. It's the only thing that appeared to drop out. And you could argue it would have been a good one to include. Yeah. So I guess, Mark, maybe the next part to look at is the language around the participant usage of the scheme.
Yeah, so in the document it talked about there'd been a 9% increase in the number of participants accessing therapeutical services. It was very factual. It was, talking almost like that this was a problem. I think for me, what I really believe is that there was no language back to how good this is for the scheme. There's a number of things that can really make a difference. Employment services and upskilling, job training and things like that. But all allied health and therapy services, if done correctly, should be designed to get a return for both the participant and for the scheme in general. And they're looking at allied health, which makes up, I believe, 11% of total spending of the scheme only.
So they're seeing allied health as a real cost to the scheme, as opposed to delivering actual benefits and return to the participants and then to the scheme, which longer run would reduce spend?
Absolutely. Not just directly will it reduce for the scheme, but it will reduce costs to other government-funded things like hospitals, housing, residential aged care, which all don't fall under the NDIS. But if we can maintain independence, it stops expenses blowing out in other areas that the government also funds through the thing, let alone the more services that a participant can access that will help them specifically get to their personal outcomes. I just think that the language should be a bit more around, or should be solely about how this is actually a benefit to the scheme as a whole. That the costs will continue to rise, but this is the single biggest thing that will have an impact on long-term reduction of it.
Yeah, for sure. So therapeutic support will help our participants, enable them to do more versus administrative costs and assessment costs.
Get a job, stay in a job longer, stay independent in their home, require less support workers support because they're capable of doing more things.
Less impact on family members.
Where is the communication around how much the support worker, core supports is the biggest area of the NDIS but there is no communication around reducing that. And the allied health has the biggest impact on being able to reduce the biggest spend in the support. No one here says that a participant shouldn't receive it, but it's about receiving what they require to get their outcomes, not. And if we can reduce that over time, that's a win for the participant, not reliant on support workers to be there. It's a win for the scheme, and it's a win for the whole process of creating independence and capabilities of people to be able to do things.
Do you see that, I guess, in the review process that they've misunderstood the value of therapy within the scheme and the point of having therapy?
I think over the course of 10 years of the NDIS, I think that's very clear. Is because the language is, a good friend of mine calls it the cuddlers. It's like all they're trying to do is cuddle the people in need versus giving them the empowerment skills to be able to go and receive outcomes in the areas that they are hoping to attain. We're not creating the goals for people. The participants are creating their own personal goals, but the allied health is the biggest and single-minded thing that will enable participants to achieve outcomes. And there is no language about that. It's all about how do we cuddle you, how do we support you, and put a Band-Aid over and limit the potential capabilities of what participants are capable of achieving.
Yeah. So there's been growth in the scheme, but they're not really clear whether it's growth of participants or just growth in usage of allied health and therapy services.
Yeah, I mean, obviously part of that 9% growth would be increase in just people coming onto the scheme. But I think it's a good thing if more people are actually accessing
100%.
therapeutical services, as long as the practitioners providing them are providing outcome goal-orientated services.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other argument.
Because that could be a real segue there into around registered providers versus unregistered providers.
Well, that's a big one. That I guess the biggest shock to me in this whole thing was to see those statistics. 90%, only 10% of providers are registered with the NDIS, and that just blew my mind. That meant 90% are unregistered. I have no comprehension of how the NDIS could even allow this.
Unregistered equals ungoverned?
It is literally something that just, as a taxpayer, as a person who has gone down the process and became registered from the day that it was announced, the NDIS, it's something that I believe that if we are taking and spending or using taxpayers' money to provide services, that we should be held to a higher accountable. Now, I will say that the audit process is an absolute chore.
Look, having recently been going through it, it's a challenge. I do wonder sometimes the understanding of real-world application of the scheme versus some tick-the-box exercises.
Yeah. I'll go on record to say that the ladies that were doing our audit in our company they were lovely, okay? And they were following the process of the audit. And I can see that they're doing a good job at what they're required to do. But there is no concept in the audit of taking participants to the next level. It's what can we find that you're doing wrong from an administrative documentation.
Yeah. It's a compliance to the paperwork of the scheme as opposed to the quality of the services that are being provided.
And clearly that audit process is a barrier. The registration and audit process is a barrier which is stopping.
It's expensive, Mark.
Yeah,
it's expensive.
And my argument is that it's not that we take it out. I would argue that it needs to be refined better, which will enable the smaller providers to become registered, because the fact that they're not registered and not being held to the same governance standards, that they just by taking plan managed, they can service now 50 or 60% of the NDIS participants, because and almost skip the immigration queue as such. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I just think the NDIS needs to act on what their plan is and make sure that all providers become registered. Can they improve the registration process and the audit process? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not here to agree with that, but the fact is to have 90% of providers not registered it's shocking.
Yeah, 100%. There needs to be a high level of registration for providers that are essentially using the taxpayer dollars, and to have some quality governance and appropriate oversight of that spend. It needs to be there. We certainly hear from the minister and from the government that they're fighting fraud and they're approaching all of these different things to try and reduce the cost of the scheme. I'd argue they need to have a look at the registration costs and the overall administrative costs of the scheme, because they're quoted as being at greater than 30% cost of the scheme, but that's not even touched in the new pricing guidelines.
One of the things that it said was that the unregistered providers provide a significantly lower amount. The 10% of registered providers provide 68% of the services, with the average unregistered provider providing less than five clients in a month. And that's really interesting, because what happens is a lot of these unregistered providers that think that they can go out on their own and start their own business, they end up doing contract work for the registered providers to subsidize their income. And so it was really interesting to see, because when they contract, they fall under the registered providers thing. So it was really interesting to see that wasn't raised at all.
And I guess an example would be within our business. We have a number of contractors that support our clients, but it's not a large proportion of the work we provide.
Yeah.
We provide it with our own employees, with our own staff that have good governance and have appropriate training, ongoing development, so that they can remain top of the class as a practitioner.
Yeah, definitely. I think not only do they get the support structure that you don't get in that independent environment, but you're also getting all your benefits. And I think what the NDIS doesn't realise in this is they have allowed this lower form of provider registration, therefore a lower form of governance to the scheme, and the system has created this.
Yeah, the barriers to entry that way, I think maybe it was intentional to reduce the barriers at one point so that there would be enough providers. But I think it's probably time to really act on what they've announced, which is to have compulsory registration, but they've delayed it again. We're not seeing really firm timelines on when registration will have to be compulsory and actually be mandated.
Yeah, that'd be a good thing for the industry, I think, because it will remove the lower governance, people not quite providing the services at the standard. Those people will have to come in under a structure of support again through a bigger organisation, which is a good thing. When they're ready, they can go out on their own and start. They can start again and look to endeavour to own their own business. But what we're finding is with these unregistered providers is a very weak as a whole. There is some very, very good practitioners that see this as an opportunity to have more flexibility. I agree. Yep. But as a whole, it hasn't promoted the upskilling of practitioners to meet the standard, a high standard that is required with the NDIS. And I think creating that governance model by forcing registration is just the start.
Yeah, well, we've discovered that, or not discovered, we've seen that through our audit process, that it's a positive that they're looking to see records of the ongoing professional development that staff have.
Yeah.
As a single shop owner, operator,
unregistered,
you can only go out and buy training. There's a cost to it. It could be limited in the scope and the volume of training and support you can get, as opposed to in an organisation where you can have levels of skill and support that's there every day and every hour of the week.
There's a difference between clinical upskilling and quality assurance, because what the audit process does ensures the quality assurance. Even if you are upskilling and meeting your governing body, Speech Pathology Australia,
SR,
etc. You're meeting those requirements to keep your registration. The unregistered don't have that quality assurance component that the audit process creates, and I think this is that we're very much on that same thing, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. And I want to see that within. But coming back to it, there was no mention of this it was. All it said was that unregistered providers are a bit more flexible, which I completely disagree with. It's about, working, to within the system to be able to provide the services to as many people as possible. And when there's a need in, metropolitan areas where our clinics are, but we go out to the regional areas as well. We've got a number of regional clinics, but we go out beyond that and try to service as many from our city locations, and that's what we're endeavouring to try to do. And if we can expand that, we'll see some real improvements.
Yeah, I mean, there's a genuine belief that an in-clinic model as opposed to a community model is the best way. There'll certainly be some participants that can have more challenges to get into our clinics or into any clinics, but there's certainly an advantage to getting out of the house, getting out of wherever you are, and being mobile and coming in a clinic and getting supported that way.
Yeah, the narrative around providing services to the community in their home is one that's got to change. We know that there is beneficial for some clients with behavioural and environmental issues, but the research overwhelmingly states that about the in-clinic model and getting outcomes to being a better for the majority of participants. Just coming into the clinic for an appointment and being part of that community adds value to the participant's life versus being stuck at home and do. Most of the time, the benefits in the community is family convenience, carer convenience, not what's best for the participant. There is always exceptions. We've just realised, that we'll come to it in a second, but even our company that is an in-clinic model does work in the community, and there's clients that there is always an exception. There's also potentially, in regional and remote areas where bringing a participant out, on a rotating roster every couple of weeks to where travel needs to be, done and going into the community as such may be of benefit.
Yep.
Because to travel, to send a practitioner a couple of hours to go and do 4 or 5 people is better than 4 or 5 people traveling a couple of hours into a central clinic.
Yeah, for sure.
So there is benefits, and there is probably areas where we're not denying the need for an in-community, in-school model, but what we really believe is looking at it of in-clinic model that you go out when needed.
Yeah, and I think the model that you've built, Mark, is a clinic-based model because you really see and value the benefits of that for participants. It's not denying that there's needs for community-based work, and you provide that, but a reliance across some of the industry players where you could see maybe 40% of their revenue is coming from travel, I think is taking a little bit of the mickey there.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the other thing with the travel and community model is there's certainly in the assessment space the need to spend a little bit more in the assessment phase of a person's recommended treatment action plan, both from a reporting, whether it be a functional capacity assessment or an AT or SIL, like that assessment phase quite often needs to be done in the community. But it's the physical treatment and the therapeutical intervention space where, you should be trying to integrate them in and coming in. I think that's where the community-only providers that have a one model implementation where they're doing both the assessment and reporting, but also providing the services solely, miss the mark in this space. And I think that segues us into the travel component of the price reductions.
So just a summary of the changes then. Essentially, travel charge rates have been halved, and the allowable time that can be charged has stayed still capped at 30 minutes each way within the metro areas, but the charge rate has halved.
Yeah, so what has that meant for our company, Phil? We've been now 1 week and 1 week only with the new changes. How much of our revenue was coming from travel 2 weeks ago?
Yep. So 2 weeks ago, and this is a trend, is about 5.1% of revenue. It comes from travel, which isn't a huge number. I'd imagine there's industry players out there that could be at 30, 40% of their revenue coming from travel.
Not could be. I know for a fact in talking with, that most community-only providers are well over 30% and hitting 40% of their revenue comes from travel. So
how many clients would they see a day? Not many.
Well, we do the maths, isn't it? It's like, in an 8-hour day, in an in-clinic model, you can provide, 30 to 40% more versus spending it in the car. An extra 2 to 3 clients per day would be able to be seen by providing those services in. Now, not all of it's going to be able to be, done in clinic. We just mentioned before the assessment, but dramatically reducing that travel time.
Yeah. So does anyone actually get better from travel time?
Well, it's an investment in, I guess, you're investing into travel because the person can't, ideally. Yep. You talked about 5.1% of the revenue coming from travel, okay, where some companies are very much 30 to 40%. And, that's both registered and unregistered, okay, because the truth is the majority of unregistered don't have a physical clinic. They're doing community-only based, and so their travel...
There'd have to be travel on each side of every appointment.
Yeah. Now, it's a bit more when you've got a big long report that needs... It's little bit less of a percentage when the big long report, because you go do the assessment, you come back and write the report.
Yeah.
But it's almost 1-for-1 in therapy. 50% of your revenue that you generate is generated from travel in a therapy or a physical rehabilitation.
So if you're doing an hour session in the community, you could be charging up to an hour of travel for that session.
Literally, a lot of companies are. And so, yeah, it's just an interesting thought. What's my take on it? I think this will be controversial because I'm hearing from practitioners how hard it is. And I know for a fact that this is affecting us. Like, this cost us $12,500 last week in our company. That's going to be $600,000 a year, that single change. Now, that's huge. That's $600,000 that we can't reinvest into wages. We can't invest into clinical and professional development. It's almost like we got to take a piece of the chunk out of that. In the end, it's $600,000 off, our top line revenue with no way to get it back on the bottom line. We can't reduce expenses. It's a cost that we're doing. Now, we're lucky enough that such a small percentage of our revenue came from travel, but 600,000 is a big hit to our company.
Yeah, it is.
12 months ago, that probably would have sent us under. Now, we've done a lot of things to reduce our administrative burden in the company and bring our productivity levels up within that we can absorb that. And that's a really great thing 12 months on. But I know for a fact, as talking with my peers out there, that this in 1 week, they're now freaking out.
Yeah.
Because
can you see other providers vanishing?
There's no doubt about it that it will. I'm going to come back. We'll come back and we'll loop. I'll answer that question, but I'll loop back into saying why I think it's a good idea. And I'm not totally against the travel reduction.
So for these travel changes, Mark, is it all positive or is some negatives? What's your view?
Well, it's definitely both. I know if we've been affected by $600,000 immediately overnight, we're only given 2 weeks notice, yet we can absorb that cost at loss to the business. But there's companies out there that are immediately hurting. Like, let's take these travel changes out. I know 14 allied health businesses between New South Wales and Queensland that went bust in the last 12 months or 18 months. We're already getting a squeeze. We're going to talk about this shortly about wage growth, and the businesses are already going to squeeze. So there's going to be community-only businesses out there that this is going to be really hard. Now, I believe, businesses need to adapt and and to whatever changes they are. And so this is going to be a real negative on the businesses with it, to the point where, practitioners, I'd advise you to probably assess and check and see how your company's doing over the next 3 months. And how are you as a practitioner going to replace that revenue that you were spending in travel? Obviously, you've got to see an extra client a day to be able to afford the salary that you're on. Now, if you can do that, great. My argument is, why weren't you doing it beforehand? But to maintain these high salaries now that the allied health professionals get is, that is. So there's going to be a squeeze on businesses and how well they can adapt in this short term. That's going to be the negative. From a positive point of view, though, what is the purpose of the scheme? Is to give people the services they need. And if we're spending too much, the system, again, comes back to the system. The system allowed the ability for companies to not invest into building facilities, to not invest into the clinical and professional development of their practitioner staff, by creating a community-only model, because they were allowed to charge the same amount that you were charging for your professional services as you were being paid to courier yourself to the venue to provide the services. And I think this is a really, really positive change for the scheme in the long run. Do I believe that we should have been given 2 weeks notice? Hell no. Okay. You are literally putting, the NDIS is putting the businesses with no warning on notice that some of them are not going to be able to survive. But good businesses will adapt. Good businesses will understand that they will bring their services back to what we were designed to do, is provide physical rehab and therapeutical intervention for people who need. That becomes outcome-driven goals for participants that help them achieve their personal goals, but also achieving the goals of what the scheme is intended to do, and that is invest into the people's needs so that they and the scheme and the country can get a return on investment.
So there's a risk here for providers, and we certainly have felt that there's been a lot of conversations across our management group of how we can shift our model, where we can shift the model. There's a risk there as well for the participants. As providers close, what about the participants that they were servicing? There are participants that need the travel.
100%.
How do they get serviced?
When it's no longer financially viable, it's more financially viable to see. You're 100% right. I'd even go as far as to say is that we are even looking in our company at, decentralizing away from the NDIS, and looking for other revenue streams in certain areas, because if we're not going to be moving to the fee non-increases and the cuts in a second, but all of a sudden the NDIS is placing barriers on the business. Psychologists is a perfect example where very few psychologists want to work in the NDIS because their rate of what they charge privately is significantly lower.
Yeah, the market rate isn't recognised by the NDIS.
It's not recognised in any field.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to dispute the arguments in a second, but there's a real risk of more and more providers actually looking to provide their services to other populations in the country than the NDIS. And I think the NDIS needs to take a look at this, and they need to understand the consequences of what they're doing. Do I think travel, a reform needed for travel? Yeah, absolutely, I did. I believe that the system allowed companies and providers to provide a model that wasn't the best patient-centered care model. I believe that if we can move it back to the patient outcome, the RTAP creation, and being held accountable to the participant goals, the scheme's goals, and an RTAP, both short-term, 3-12 months, but also long-term. What does this 16-year-old participant treatment going to be looking like as a 45-year-old?
What are their goals, and what plans are we putting in place to achieve them?
And understanding that $8,000 to $12,000 a year of investment into that will save the taxpayer hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in hospital and residential living facility care and things like that. Like, let alone what can happen, cutting support worker costs in the thing. And the NDIS needs to really step up and, have a look, because they're enabling, things to occur. So there's some positives and negatives around the travel. I think reform is needed. I'm actually not opposed to the actual rates of 50% for travel. Probably, if I was to do the maths and the realization, they're probably somewhere in between. Maybe 65% would probably be a fairer time. It's just a number that sort of, it reduces the travel time. But, it's affecting us, but nowhere near as what it is affecting.
And it will affect our service delivery model, but not nearly as significantly as those community-only based providers. We will give priority to those clients and participants that will come into the clinic.
100%.
We are a commercial business. We're not gold plating our gym equipment, but we do need to be a profitable business so that we can help more participants and engage with more staff. Priorities are to go to clients and participants that can come into our clinic.
Yeah. Before we get into the pricing, the state loading, that was one that was, again, I'm probably supportive of that. I know in our business we have 2 clinics down in Hobart, and there were certain services that just got an extra loading on top.
So what's the history of the loading that they provide in those regional areas? I think it was Western Australia, Tasmania, a few other locations.
The history behind it was there was a shortage of practitioners, and it was designed to be able to provide
attracting staff
so
that you can provide a service.
That's right. Now the problem, they had to do it because the way they rolled out the NDIS. I remember in our Goulburn clinic and our regional clinics when the first NDIS, we were able to recruit a lot from South Australia and Western Australia because the NDIS hadn't rolled out. There were so few jobs pre-NDIS that we were recruiting people to come to some of our regional areas. And as a result, they stripped their own workforce by delaying. Western Australia was the last state to roll out. And they were so short of staff because there was a 20-30% of the workforce had moved to moved to the East Coast. And so what it was designed to attract there. I think it's really important to distinguish the fact that the state loading, they did not remove the remote and very remote loadings. And those remote and very remote loadings are applied based on the modified Monash model, triple M model. City, residential, capital cities are 1 triple M. As you move out 2, 3, and 4. And so pretty much most, it's based on the size of the town, the population centre, and how far away you are from it. Once you get out above 30 minutes from a population centre, it could be a regional centre like a Goulburn or a Ballarat or a Gympie or, something like that. Once you move out, you move in. And 6 triple M was considered remote and 7 triple M was considered very remote. Those were never removed. And so my argument potentially with some of those state loading was maybe potentially looking at some of those remote that are classified as 4 or 5 and maybe giving them the 6 or 7 based on the thing. Because there's no doubt the practitioners are still in Darwin, the practitioners are still in Perth. Okay, how do they service the more
remote
regional areas?
Yeah.
Because those loadings haven't been removed. It was just that there was this blanket state for certain, not all services, just some services. Physio and BSP are the two in particular that come to mind. And so I think it affected us in our Tasmanian arm of the business, but as a whole, I'm completely happy with it. I don't see why there was a need for a higher fee for different states. Let's have a look at the 5 triple M and see whether there needs to be a smaller fee into providing services. I know we are looking at how we can look at providing services and whether there's a need in some of these higher fee paying stuff where if we can go out and fly in, fly out or drive
an outreach model.
Model, provide services, because how do we utilize the funding that's there appropriately? Because it's designed because it's going to cost extra to get there, but it's, and it's not always desirable to base yourself in those areas.
Yeah.
So that's what, believe that remote loading that was, no, not the remote loading, the state loading, removing, again, another positive from the space.
Yeah. So Mark, a hot topic again is the fees within the scheme. I guess there's 2 facets to look at here. There's history of the fees and what the market was expecting. I'd argue the market was looking for and expecting an increase.
I think they were expecting, 12 months ago we were expecting. I think it was becoming very clear that it wasn't going to happen as it was coming.
And it didn't come. And if we have a look at, I guess, Australia as an economy and what's been going on across the last 8 to 10 years, inflation probably up 40%, wages in the allied health space probably up 40%. So significant increase in cost.
Phil, let's go to that. Let's break that down. Let's use Optum as an example. What have been the wages increase in? I think we can talk about. Let's look at this. The last pay increase from the NDIS, Allied Health have had 1 pay increase since the inception of the scheme, roughly about 18 months after. Okay, fees went from $185 to $193.99. But it's been 8 years since the last fee increase, or 7.5 years, something like that, since COVID. What are the statistics with wage growth? Talk me through that.
Yeah, wage growth has been significant. With more participants coming into the scheme, demand for service has been high. There's been competition across different players and providers in the industry that has pushed wages up. So I'd argue, Mark, that wages have gone up since COVID, probably 30%, but from when the scheme commenced, probably 40% increase in wages.
Yeah, I just know that. I mean, obviously we talk about this all the time, but it's just, there's no doubt about it that the NDIS created a real positive for the industry and that ability. I mean, I go back pre-NDIS, and the average life cycle of a practitioner was as little as 4 to 8 years, depending on the services, because wage growth was so low. Mothers didn't return back to work because the salaries were low. So people moved on. The dream was always to get in the hospital role because you got your incremental year on year thing. Yeah. So that wage growth has been a positive. But since post-COVID, 30% wage growth has just crippled the industry. And without a fee increase for 8 years, coming on to 8 years, it's the pressure on businesses is just huge. What I think what really surprised me was there was no dialogue around the administrative burden. Okay. We'll get into the comparisons to other, schemes and things like that, but the amount of costs that it costs a company working in the NDIS through administrative burden on top of that we're not getting remunerated for is just huge into that. And there's no dialogue. No dialogue once mentioned by the independent recommendations or in the pricing guide. I remember our very, very first audit. We got our registration in our very first audit. It was a gentleman, and I wish I could remember his name. But he worked for the NDIS in setting up the scheme. And I remember we were charging slightly less to the scheme. And this was the auditor. He'd gone independent. He'd gone commercial to capitalise on his knowledge of the NDIS as part of the audit. And he told us not to charge the rates because the NDIS understood how much administration went in, that pretty much 1 in 4 hours, or for every 4 hours, 1 hour of administration needs to be in, gets done. That includes your service agreements, your funding, your billing, your chasing up of payments, the auditing of your financial situation. It's just quite amazing to see that there was no communication and no mention of that, just trying to justify an incorrect statistics around prices being charged, that they didn't need to increase the fees, and quite the opposite, that they could reduce the fees that they were being charged.
Not recognising all the additional costs of providing the service that are there. They're not insignificant. It's not a standard private practice delivering a physiotherapy service where the physio provides the service, takes the money at the front door and writes a few case notes, and away you go. Yeah. There's a lot more needed to be a registered provider, from the documentation for our participants, making sure that they're getting what they need, that we're recognising their goals, that we're delivering on their goals, communication with various stakeholders, be it their support coordinators, be it their plan managers with the NDIS, complexity around invoicing.
Some of that non-face-to-face is certainly billable, but there's plenty. Some of when dealing with your stakeholders, and no one would argue that isn't a part of the scenario, but it's the non-billable work that you do, as by your non-practitioner staff, that doesn't get billed for, and there was no mention of that at all. So the extra administrative work that is required for the NDIS still doesn't compensate the fact that claims were made that providers are out there across the board are providing services at a lower hourly rate than what the NDIS rate. I'm going to call BS on this completely. I do not know a reputable provider that is charging less than $193.99 for any of their services. Physios, OT, speech pathologists. That statement that was made is the absolute. There's not a chance that can hold any merit when if done. Comparing it to Medicare fees, where it's almost like, I know within our company, is almost like a give back because it's a short-term, non-long-term outcome related service, where in our physio, we still charge our normal private rate. We're trying to provide them with a service under that scheme. I just find it absolutely appalling that the NDIS would have the hide to say that providers out there are charging less for NDIS if it's just not true.
It doesn't make sense when you look at the lack of increase in the fees. How could you be viable to charge a lower rate?
It's not possible. If you were going to run a proper business that provides clinical support, have a proper administrative structure to ensure governance of the NDIS scheme, okay, and provide salaries to attract outstanding staff or even competent staff. I won't even use the word outstanding to provide outstanding. It physically is not possible to run a business without scaling so big at the prices that are there. And I think point number 2 is NDIS needs to have a look at themselves. To be quoting that is absolutely disgraceful from a perspective to play that narrative around. If anything, private practices have brought their fees down to fall in line with NDIS pricing to create consistency versus, charging less. I do not know a single business that charges less for private practice. For work than for any other worker to them. Yep. And Medicare is another government-funded scheme that a lot of businesses do as a bit of a give back under the thing. We use it as lead generation for some of our physical rehab programs, where we move them into group-based intervention. So we have that ability to back-end a financial benefit from it. But, under some of the therapeutical interventions.
And that Medicare piece, it's short term, it's a few subsidised sessions from the government to try and get a health benefit by investing in the clients in that stage. Similar to the NDIS, they're subsidising or fully funding the spend to try and improve someone's health.
Which then brings to the fact that they had the hide to say physiotherapy to reduce by 10%, and podiatry and dietetics by 5%.
And more where it was the state-based changes.
I know
even bigger drops.
Our dietitians sort of sits at around that same pricing points, but I know dietitians that, are $280 an initial and, $110 for a 20-minute consultation. It is probably the single most unfactually correct thing and the hide that they had to bring that in and reduce the ability on what is already a stress market. As I said, before this, there was, I know, 14 businesses that had gone under. It talks about in here that 2% of there's 2% less registered providers than there was 12 months ago. Well, the reason is because they're the ones that have gone under. No one who's got the registration is just going to give it up.
Yeah, it's a big investment to get it, but the number of providers has dropped
because it's the companies
not viable.
The companies that have gone under.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they've all run good business models, and they all, could they, I've got no idea, but I know across New South Wales and Queensland that this is the case. The drop in registered providers is because they've gone under.
The scheme's hard to deal with. It's expensive to run. They may still be operating as a business, but not in the NDIS.
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue that they're not actually operating. That's probably where the 2%
Yeah.
has come from in the drop. You talked about wage growth 30%. I think you made a statement there, just cost of living and CPI.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are the statistics in this last 8 years with
Yeah,
that?
if we look at the last 8 years, wage growth has been high. We live in a strong economy with high wage growth. And CPI, cost of living, it's in most headlines most weeks, the cost of living, the housing crisis, it's all a cost of living impact. So everything is more expensive except the NDIS mark.
Yeah, it's thing. I think we graphed it on a graph a couple of weeks ago where it was pretty nice, steady before COVID. Obviously, it flattened. There was growth, and there wasn't during COVID, as a bit of decline. But post COVID, the CPI, and we're all feeling it. Okay,
Yeah.
every single one of our staff, us as leadership are feeling it. The cost of living. How is the government not seen when they've raised support workers' wages? They've raised, every single person across the NDIS except decided that allied health is not valuable and it's not worth investing in.
Yeah. I think it's a conflict with other departments. If you look at Fair Work, they're talking about increases within allied health. They see it as an undervalued sector, particularly for females, and they're looking at increasing over a period of time wages by up to 30%. I'm not sure where that's going to be funded from, yet the scheme has remained flat for 8 years. Everything else has gone up except the NDIS.
Yeah, it's something. What's your what's your advice to this? Because there's no doubt about it. We just look at it and go, this is ludicrous in their attitude. It's almost an arrogance and an insolence just to say, we do not value this part of the NDIS and we're looking to do anything to remove the physical thing, the physical single thing that will make the biggest difference to a participant's life, is that we're looking to actually reduce it out of a plan.
I think it's a political challenge and a budgetary challenge for the government, and they don't know how to solve it. They talk about the growth in the scheme in the billions and billions of dollars. I think it's amazing that we have this scheme as a country, and there are countries that are jealous and enviable of us to have this as a scheme. But they've built a scheme that is so expensive that they haven't worked out how to fund it. So they're slicing and chopping at some of the weakest levels within the scheme. So that I think, gut feel, rather than cutting the spend for participants, they're making it impossible to service, which will reduce the spend in the scheme because participants won't be able to get service, which will reduce the cost of the scheme. Participants are the ones that are going to suffer.
But I guess the biggest argument that I have is that if you reduce costs in here, you're going to increase the costs in the residential space, in the living capabilities,
These hidden costs.
care. No, they're not hidden. They're straight there. Okay, these are straight. It's going to come back to bite them in that the fees will. The costs, more carers are going to be required, more cost in accommodation and the living situation is required, not just the NDIS, but in the other schemes that tap into these areas. And it's
aged care after NDIS, the more you can keep people in the home, which you can build those strengths and skills and resilience throughout someone's life cycle within NDIS, may keep them out of an aged care facility for multiple years afterwards. And the cost per year of an aged care facility is hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, on average, I think $230,000 to $260,000 it costs the taxpayer just in that. Which, they just look at it. And my message to the NDIS and my message to practitioners out in, watching this podcast today is, share the voice, okay? Change the dialogue. Let's get the dialogue changed about. And my message as practitioners is you've got to be at the practitioner level. You've got to be changing that dialogue. Be better at communicating how this program will save the scheme money in the long runs. Communicate better with the powers that be of why your services are not negotiable for this client and what the benefits will be for them achieving their goals, their community interaction, their independence, and the cost saving through. Be better at that. The funding review reports, everything that you do, be better and clearer at the message, because the government needs to understand that this is the single best thing that can happen for an NDIS participant, is receiving this. In the short term, the need for carers. And there's no doubt that support workers, the ability to give people support workers and allow family members to get back out into the workforce, because that person now is a taxpayer where they're at home. They're stimulating the economy by providing workforce. There's so many benefits to the scheme, but our goal is to be able to provide those services for that the person only needs those services, say 3 hours per day, not 8 hours a day, that they are capable of being at home independently. They are capable of, achieving goals. And allied health is the single biggest thing that will enable people to do it. And I want our workforce out there, our practitioners out there, to really understand that their voice is, and this has to be the message. So let's summarize the changes. I think we the dialogue they're using, needs to change back to the benefits of the scheme and the return on investment. This concept of, that we're all in this, the taxpayers in it, and the benefit. We love the NDIS as a whole. What it has meant for that area of our community that are going through or been through the, whether it's physical accident or a genetic, it doesn't matter. It's a case of, changing that dialogue is absolutely important. I really believe that we should be encouraging, the increase of those services. I always look at it like a little bit like, the work cover thing, where you've got to be showing the outcomes to receive it. And I think if practitioners come back to that outcomes and are held to the RTAP, because if it's not working, they should be encouraged to find a new provider. Now, independence of choices, there's a fine line. I don't know how we can do that, but the principle of outcome, short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes is really...
And that's that clinical excellence that you really want to see the participants receiving. If they're not improving, if they're not, at the very least, maintaining, they need to change and have a look at how they're being supported.
Yeah, definitely. I think we support overall the changes to the travel, Not fan of how it was rolled out in such short. I don't think it gave businesses that were using the scheme, how they were entitled to do it, the chance to modify it quick enough in time. $600,000 hit to our business. That's, that is huge. Overall, we believe that less time has to be spent. We also believe that this will encourage an in-clinic model. It will encourage people, where possible, to go to the clinic versus having the services.
Which can lead to better outcomes.
So statistically, it will.
Yeah.
For majority of people. There is exceptions. I don't want my comments to blow up saying, I admit that, but you've got more resources. You've got a multidisciplinary team if you're in a multidisciplinary clinic. But even then, if you're in a single discipline clinic, you can still bounce ideas off practitioners.
Yeah.
Your learning and development as a practitioner goes up, therefore your ability to apply that. There's just so much clinical benefit of
the in-clinic model, and more of the funding that's available can be spent on the therapy, not the travel.
I don't believe we have a practitioner shortage problem. What we have is a use of resource problem, because we've been using it too much in the assessment and reporting space. It's needed, but not at the volume that we did in the first 8 years. And secondly, if we used it back into the intervention space of servicing, providing therapeutic intervention and physical rehab, we wouldn't have a shortage, and people would then move them out to more regional areas and areas where people are struggling to be there. And making these changes so that the model becomes harder to run a model on travel is a good thing long run, So I want you to think about, I think, looking for organisations that, have both okay, that have a base in which you can, create your back-to-back appointments to keep that billing up is really important, that you should be looking at. For those practitioners, I'm not telling you to go and resign now, but certainly look over the next 3 months, see how your organization, how your company is adapting. Some of these independent providers that are out there, these unregistered providers, is maybe you might have to look at, see whether it's viable as to with the travel reductions, and get yourself back employed into either as a contractor, but more important, as
in a full service model with a provider that can provide all of the benefits.
That's right.
Of employment,
but give you that ability to be back to back appointments and do what we're paid to do, or why we went to university, is to
support
get
more people.
That's right.
Yeah, we have one of our managers, I think his catch cry is, did you go to uni to just see 2 or 3 people a day? No.
Well, that's a good, that's right. Yeah. I remember as an exercise physiologist, running 3 and 4 to 1 sessions because I could see more people, but I would see, up to 25 people a day, in those, and they're full service, and I know these are some of the things that we're looking, we do and apply in our company across all services now, like not everyone is suitable for a group-based PED session, but if we can get funding to go further, and then all of these things. We're getting off track here.
Yeah, I think, Mark, there's probably another podcast we can come back to on how the scheme could or should look, how the assessment space could be addressed. I think there's a whole nother topic we could dive into there.
Definitely. But yeah, definitely. The final point is I think we certainly agree that the fee structure, their justification for not increasing the fees of allied health professionals is unwarranted. To actually cut the costs of 3 services and then reduce and not give a fee increase when we've had 40% wage growth since the start of the scheme and 30% in the last 3.5 years, and a CPI of 40% over the course of this, the pressure is just too high. What we will see is quality, talented employees in this industry leave for higher roles if the fees aren't increased, or businesses will move out of servicing NDIS into other revenue streams that are more affordable, less administrative burden.
And it's easier to operate in that model. I guess the other fear is that the unregistered providers, they'll cut corners.
Well, there's an argument that they already do.
Yeah.
And for those who are amazing, there is plenty out there, but there's plenty that, very much aren't up to the speed to be working independently at the moment without a quality assurance backing behind them through. But there's a place for it. We hope that everyone becomes registered. I think, there's not a person who's deep in the industry that doesn't believe that's got to happen.
Yeah.
The accountability back to the scheme and the quality assurance that needs to be. We can make a lot of changes, and we talked about that. We can talk about this, but I think that summarizes the changes for over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. It's been a fun time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Bye.